we saw the giants, the sons of Anak.
I grew up in a small town in Northern California, surrounded by dense forests and mountains. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else, and nothing much ever happened. That all changed one summer night when I was 17. I've never told this story to anyone outside my family because, honestly, who would believe me? But here it goes. It was late July, and a group of us from high school had decided to go camping in the woods a few miles outside of town. It was our last hurrah before senior year, and we wanted to make the most of it. There were 5 of us. Me, my best friends Mike and Sam, and our girlfriends, Lisa and Jenny. We packed up our tents, coolers, and flashlights, and headed out late in the afternoon. We found a nice spot by a creek, set up camp, and spent the day swimming, fishing, and just goofing around. As the sun set, we built a big campfire, roasted marshmallows, and told ghost stories. It was all fun and games, until around midnight, when things started to get strange. It started with the sounds. At first, they were faint, distant rustling, like something moving through the trees. We didn't pay much attention, thinking it was just the wind or some animal. But then, the noises grew louder and more deliberate. Branches snapping, footsteps crunching through the underbrush. It felt like we were being watched. Mike and I decided to take a look around, more out of curiosity than concern. We grabbed our flashlights and ventured out into the darkness, leaving the others by the fire. The woods were eerily quiet, aside from the occasional sound of something moving nearby. After a few minutes of searching and finding nothing, we decided to head back. As we were making our way back to the camp, we heard it. A low, guttural growl that sent chills down my spine. It was close. Too close. We froze, scanning the area with our flashlights. Then something caught my eye. A large, dark shape, moving about 50 feet away. A chill ran down my spine and my blood felt like it turned to ice. The beam of my flashlight landed on it for just a second, but it was enough to see that it was standing on 2 legs and covered in dark hair. Before I could say anything, Mike saw it too. His face went pale, and without a word, we both broke into a sprint. We didn't stop until we were back at the campsite, gasping for breath. The others could see the panic on our faces and knew something was wrong. "We need to leave," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "There's something out there. Something big." Sam tried to laugh it off, saying it was probably just a bear. But Mike and I knew better. Bears don't stand on 2 legs, and they sure as hell don't stalk people like that. We started packing up, trying to keep calm, but the sense of urgency was palpable. As we were finishing up, the noises started again, louder and more deliberate. Footsteps, heavy and measured, coming closer. We grabbed our gear and started to make our way back to the cars, sticking close together. I kept looking over my shoulder, feeling like we were being hunted. Then, just as we reached the road, we heard it. A deafening roar that echoed through the trees. It was like nothing I'd ever heard before, primal and terrifying. We all broke into a run, not stopping until we reached the cars. We piled in and drove back to town as fast as we could, no one saying a word. When we finally got back to my house, we sat in the car for a few minutes, trying to process what had just happened. Lisa and Jenny were both crying, and even Sam looked shaken. "We're never going back there," Mike said finally, breaking the silence. We all nodded in agreement. It's been 10 years since that night, and I still think about it often. I've done a lot of research on Bigfoot since then, and I'm convinced that's what we encountered. Some people think it's just a myth, but I know what I saw. I've never been back to those woods, and I never will. Whatever is out there, it's better left alone. I just hope I never have to hear that roar again. Growing up in the Florida Panhandle, I heard all kinds of stories about the skunk ape, a local version of Bigfoot. People said it lived in the swamps and dense forests, and could be recognized by its foul smell. Most folks laughed it off as just a myth or an old wives' tale. I was one of those people, until the summer of 2019. That summer, my cousin Jake and I decided to do some camping in the swamps near Apalachicola National Forest. We both loved fishing and figured a weekend away from civilization would do us good. We packed up our gear, loaded the boat, and headed deep into the backcountry. We found a spot to set up camp on a dry patch of land surrounded by cypress trees and thick underbrush. After setting up the tent and starting a fire, we spent the day fishing and exploring. As night fell, the air grew thick with the sounds of the swamp, frogs croaking, insects buzzing, and the occasional splash of something in the water. After a while, Jake mentioned smelling something horrible, like a mix of rotten eggs and skunk. I joked it was just a swamp gas, but soon enough I smelt it too. It was overpowering, making it hard to breathe. We tried to ignore it, thinking it would pass, but it only grew stronger. Around midnight, as we were sitting by the fire, we heard something moving through the brush. It was loud and heavy, definitely not a raccoon or a possum. We grabbed our flashlights and scanned the darkness. The smell was almost unbearable now, and my nerves were on edge. Then, we saw it. Standing just at the edge of our campfire's light was a massive figure, at least 7 feet tall, covered in dark, matted hair. Its eyes reflected the firelight, glowing eerily in the darkness. It just stood there, watching us. The stench was worse than ever, making my stomach turn. Jake and I were frozen with fear, unable to move or speak. The creature let out a low, guttural growl that vibrated through the air. And then, it stepped closer, its massive frame moving with a strange, almost fluid grace. I finally found my voice and whispered, "Jake, we need to get to the boat." He nodded, slowly, never taking his eyes off the creature. We began to back away, moving as slowly and quietly as possible. The skunk ape followed us with his gaze but didn't move. Every second felt like an eternity as we crept towards the water. When we were about 10 feet from the boat, the creature suddenly let out an ear-splitting scream and charged. That broke whatever spell we were under, and we bolted for the boat. In our panic, Jake tripped and fell, letting out a shout. I turned back to help him, and that's when I saw the creature stop, standing over him. For a moment, I was sure it was going to attack. But then, it just sniffed him, turned, and disappeared back into the swamp, leaving behind that awful smell. I helped Jake up, and we scrambled into the boat, nearly tipping it over in our haste. We didn't stop rowing until we reached the safety of the main river channel. Back at the dock, we sat in stunned silence, trying to comprehend what had just happened. Neither of us spoke about it to anyone else, for fear of being ridiculed. But we both knew we had encountered the skunk ape. In the months that followed, I read everything I could about the creature. Sightings, stories, legends. It was all fascinating and terrifying. Most people dismiss it as a hoax or misidentification, but I know what I saw. The skunk ape is real, and it's out there, stalking the swamps of Florida. I still fish and camp, but I'm much more cautious now. I always stick closer to populated areas, and I never venture into the swamp without a good flashlight and a way to quickly get back to safety. Because no matter how beautiful and serene the wilderness might seem, there are things lurking in the shadows, things that remind us we are not alone. I've always loved hiking. There's just something about being out in nature that calms me. That all changed a few years ago during a weekend trip to the Pacific Northwest with my friends. I still have nightmares about it. It was late October, and the weather was perfect for a hike. Cool, crisp air and clear skies. We decided to head out to a lesser-known trail in the Cascade Range. We packed our gear, loaded up on snacks, and set off early in the morning. The first few hours were just what we expected. Breathtaking views, the scent of pine, and the sound of leaves crunching under our boots. Around midday, we stumbled upon an old, overgrown trail that wasn't on our map. Being the adventurous type, we decided to follow it. The path led us deeper into the forest, away from the well-traveled routes. After about an hour, the trail opened up into a small clearing, and that's when things started to get weird. First, it was the silence. The usual forest sounds, birds chirping, squirrels rustling, they were gone. My buddy Dave pointed it out, asking jokingly if we'd entered some kind of no animal zone. We laughed it off, but the silence was unsettling. Then we noticed the smell. It was this foul, almost sewage-like odor, like something rotting. We couldn't figure out where it was coming from, and we quickly debated turning back. But our curiosity got the better of us, and we decided to push on. About 20 minutes later, we found something that nearly stopped my heart. There, in the soft earth of the trail, were enormous footprints. They were unlike anything I'd ever seen, easily twice the size of my boot, with a distinct 5-toe pattern. I tried to rationalize it, thinking maybe someone was playing a prank with fake footprints, but they were too deep and too real. We gathered around, speculating what could have made them. Dave, always a skeptic, started to make fun of us, seeing Bigfoot, but none of us were laughing. The prints were fresh, and from the way they indented the soil, whatever made them was heavy. We decided to keep moving, not because we wanted to, but because staying there suddenly felt wrong. As we continued, that sickening odor grew stronger, making it hard to breathe. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, and every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves made me jump. Then we heard it, a low, guttural growl, unlike any animal I'd ever heard. It echoed through the trees, freezing us in our tracks. Dave's face went pale. None of us dared to speak. The growl came again, this time closer, and I felt an overwhelming urge to run. We started to backtrack slowly, hoping to retrace our steps without provoking what was out there. But we were too late. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Something big, really big, was moving through the trees, keeping pace with us. It was just a shadow, but I could make out the shape of long, muscular limbs, moving with a terrifying grace. Suddenly there was a loud crashing sound as the creature stepped on a fallen tree branch. That was it. Instinct took over, and we ran like our lives depended on it. Which, in hindsight, they probably did. I don't think I've ever been that scared in my life. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I kept running. We didn't stop until we reached the main trail, gasping for breath and drenched in sweat. We looked back, but there was no sign of the creature. The smell was gone and the forest sounds had slowly returned. We didn't say much after that. We just wanted to get out of there. That night we sat around the campfire, trying to make sense of what we'd seen. Dave was unusually quiet. He finally broke the silence, saying, "Maybe there's more out there than we know." We all nodded in agreement. Since that day, I've never been back to the Cascades. I still love hiking, but now I stick to well-traveled trails. And every time I hear a strange noise in the forest, I wonder if it's out there watching me. Walking in those woods that day felt like we stepped into another world, one where humans didn't belong. I'm not sure what we encountered that day, but I know one thing's for sure. I'm not eager to meet it ever again. I've lived in South Florida my whole life, and I've spent more weekends than I can count out in the Everglades camping, fishing, and hiking. It's this love for the outdoors that led me to an unforgettable experience 2 summers ago. I'm not a very good writer, but I need to get this story out there. It was June 2018, one of those sticky, hot Florida nights. My buddies and I decided to do some night fishing in a remote area we hadn't been to before. We paddled our canoes deep into the swamp, further than usual, hoping for a good catch. By about midnight, we hadn't had much luck, but the quiet of the night and the occasional splash of a turtle or gator made it worth it. Then, something changed. The usual sounds of the swamp seemed to just stop. No frogs, no insects, nothing. It was eerily silent. We started to smell it before we saw anything. A rank, overpowering odor, like a mix of skunk and wet dog. It was so strong it made my eyes water. I joked about it being the biggest gator fart ever, but inside, I couldn't shake the unease creeping up my spine. As we kept fishing, we heard something moving in a brush nearby. It sounded heavy, way heavier than a deer, or even an alligator. We shined our flashlights towards the noise, but saw nothing. The smell grew stronger, almost unbearable, and my buddy Mike joked about the swamp monster coming to get us. But his laughter was nervous. I was about to dismiss the whole thing when I saw it. Across the small channel from us, just inside the tree line, stood a creature unlike anything I'd ever seen. It was huge, at least 7 feet tall, and covered in dark, matted hair. Its eyes reflected our flashlight beams with an eerie yellow glow. I couldn't believe my eyes. My heart pounded so hard, I thought it might burst out of my chest. Mike whispered, "What the hell is that?" We were all frozen, just staring. The creature took a step closer, and we could hear the branches snapping under its weight. It didn't seem aggressive, but it let out a low, guttural growl that sent shivers down my spine. We didn't dare move. The smell was almost making me gag at this point. After what it felt like forever, but was probably just a minute or two, it turned and disappeared into the trees. We sat there, in a stunned silence before practically throwing our gear into the canoes and paddling back to the dock as fast as we could. When we got back, none of us knew what to say. We just stood there, still reeling from what we'd seen. Mike finally broke the silence. "That had to be the skunk ape," he said, voice unsteady. We all nodded, not knowing what else it could have been. I've told a few people about that night, but most just laugh it off or think we were drunk. We weren't. Whatever we saw, it was real, and it was terrifying. I haven't been back to that part of the glade since, and honestly, I don't think I ever will. I've read more about skunk ape sightings since then, and while there's a lot of skepticism, I know what we saw. The Everglades hold a lot of mysteries, and not all of them are friendly. If you're ever out there and start smelling something foul, it might be best to pack up and just head home. Stay safe out there. I've been hunting all my life. It's something my dad taught me, and his dad taught him. Living in the backcountry of Montana, you grow up with a rifle in your hands and the wilderness as your backyard. There's a peace you find in the solitude of the forest, but sometimes solitude can become something much darker. A few years ago, during the late fall season, I decided to go hunting for elk. The cold air was just starting to bite, and the early snow had scared off most city folks, leaving the forest to seasoned hunters like me. I packed my gear, loaded my rifle, and set off before dawn, aiming to be deep in the woods by sunrise. I reached my favorite spot, a secluded part of the forest with a small clearing that elk frequently passed through. I settled down, blending in with the surroundings, and waited. The hours ticked by, the forest waking up around me. I spotted a few deer, but nothing that I was interested in. Around midday, the forest grew unnaturally still. The usual sounds, birds, insects, they just stopped. I've experienced this kind of silence before, and it usually meant a predator was nearby. I figured it might be a wolf or a mountain lion. Staying alert, I scanned the trees, my hand resting on my rifle. Minutes later, I caught a glimpse of movement at the edge of the clearing. At first, I thought it was a bear, given its size. But as it moved closer, I realized it was walking on two legs. It was massive, at least 8 feet tall, covered in dark, matted hair. My heart raced and I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. I was looking at something that shouldn't exist. For a moment I froze, trying to process what I was seeing. The creature was sniffing the air, clearly aware of my presence but not directly looking at me. Its arms, long and muscular, hung low, swinging slightly as it moved. I have never felt so small, so vulnerable. In all my years of hunting, I have never seen anything like this. I slowly raised my rifle, not to shoot, but to use the scope for a closer look. The creature's face came into focus, a mix of human and ape, with deep-set eyes that seemed almost intelligent. It let out a low growl, the sound vibrating through my chest. That's when it turned its head and looked directly at me. Those eyes, they were filled with a wildness, but also a strange curiosity. I didn't dare move. The creature just stared at me for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few seconds. Then, as if deciding I wasn't a threat, it turned and walked back into the forest, disappearing into the shadows with a grace that seemed impossible for something so large. I stayed in my spot for another hour, too shocked and shaken to do anything. But when I finally packed up and started the trek back to my truck, my mind was racing. Had I really just seen Bigfoot? If I hadn't been so shaken, I would have questioned my sanity. But I knew what I saw. Back home, I told my dad about it. He listened quietly, then nodded. "You saw the old man of the woods," he said, using the old folk name. Turns out, sightings weren't as uncommon as I thought. In our family, it was something of a rite of passage, though rarely spoken of. I've returned to that spot many times since, but I've never seen the creature again. I don't feel the fear I did that day, more a sense of respect for something ancient and wild that roams those woods. And though I still hunt, I've come to realize that there are things out there that aren't meant to be understood or disturbed. Sometimes, it's best to leave the mysteries of the forest just as they are. I don't usually post stuff like this, but I need to share what happened to me last summer. It was August 2022, and I decided to spend the weekend camping in Big Cypress National Preserve. I'd been camping there a few times and always loved it. The solitude, the nature, the break from city life. I picked a spot that was pretty remote, off a trail that I'd heard about from a buddy. The first night was uneventful. Typical sounds of the swamp. Frogs, crickets, some night birds. I woke up early, spent the day hiking and taking pictures, and got back to my camp just before dark. I had a quick dinner, then settled by the fire, enjoying the stillness. Around 10 p.m., things started getting weird. First, the usual night sounds just stopped. It was like someone hit the mute button. No frogs, no insects, nothing. I tried to brush it off, but it made me feel really uneasy. Then, I smelt it. This awful, overpowering stench like a mix of garbage and skunk. It was so strong I had to cover my nose. I thought maybe something had died nearby and was decomposing, but as I walked around the perimeter of my camp, the smell only got worse. And then I heard it. This rustling sound, coming from the trees. It was heavy, deliberate. I shined my flashlight in the direction of the noise, but couldn't see anything. That's when I saw them. These glowing eyes, reflecting back at me from just beyond the tree line. They were high up too, like 6 or 7 feet off the ground. My heart started pounding and I tried to rationalize what I was seeing. Maybe a deer or something? But I knew deep down that that wasn't right. Suddenly, the creature stepped into the light. It was massive, covered in dark matted hair, and walked upright like a man. It had to be at least 7 feet tall. I froze. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My first thought was, is this a bear standing on its hind legs? But the more I looked, the more I realized this was something different. The creature let out this low, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through my whole body. The smell was seriously making me nauseous at this point. My fight or flight instincts were kicking in, but I felt glued to the spot. After a few agonizing moments, it turned and disappeared back into the trees, moving quickly and quietly despite its size. I stood there for a good minute before I had the sense to grab my things. I threw my gear into my pack way faster than I should have, but I needed to get out of there. I hiked back to my car, flashlight in hand, constantly looking over my shoulder. Every rustle had me jumping out of my skin. I don't know how I managed to make it back without running into God knows what else. By the time I reached the car, I was drenched in sweat and breathing hard. I drove straight home. Didn't breathe easy until I was miles away from the preserve. I've told a few close friends about what happened, but most just laugh it off or think I'm pulling their leg. I wish I was. I've read about skunk ape sightings in Florida. Always thought they were just a local legend. Now, I'm not so sure. Whatever I saw that night, it was real, and it wasn't like any animal I'd ever seen before. Stay safe out there, folks. If you're ever in Big Cypress and you start smelling something awful, be on high alert. There's definitely something out there. Hello watchers and listeners, thank you so much for watching. If you have a story to share, please send it to my email in the description below. This channel is mostly made up of stories sent in by viewers or people they know. Another way to support the channel is to sign up for my Patreon, where you can watch my videos ad-free. More perks will be added in the new year. Also, I will be adding new designs to the merch store, so keep an eye out for that. Thank you all for your continuous support. And remember,
Papa